BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, Nedheads. Hello, Black Box Battalion. Today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? On Mondays, I talk to you guys about the Zodiac Killer, an unidentified serial killer who operated in California in 1968 and 69. And in this episode, I will be discussing the murder of Cheri Jo Bates from 1966, looking at clues in the Zodiac Killer's letters, and of course responding to your questions and comments. And you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have something to say about the Zodiac Killer. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And I am your host, Black Box Ned. Now, this is a channel that covers many cases and unsolved mysteries. Recently, I was talking to you guys about the murder of Jean-Benet Ramsey on Tuesdays, but this Tuesday there will be the start of a new series, and that will be on the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. And on the weekend, that will most likely be on Saturday of this week to anyone who's listening to this as it comes out live, I will be releasing a bonus episode on the disappearance of Maura Murray. So lots of true crime content and unsolved mystery content here on Black Box Online Radio. And I would like to let you guys know that this show is proudly sponsored by Michael Cole, a friend of the show and author of the Zodiac Revisited trilogy. If the Zodiac case fascinates you, the Zodiac Revisited is a deep dive into the mystery, and it is available anywhere you get your true crime books, including Amazon.com and Spotify. And if you enjoy the series, please consider helping Michael out by leaving a 5-star review. The first thing to share with you guys is something related to a new Zodiac Killer panel discussion show. Last year on Mysteries with Mr. Belgique, a panel discussion show was launched where Jerome, the host of Mysteries with Mr. Belgique, invited us on to talk about the Zodiac Killer, and we had multiple participants, sometimes 4, sometimes 7, sometimes more, and we would all get together and talk about the Zodiac. Now, a lot of you have been asking what happened to the panel discussion show. Perhaps it will come back to Mysteries with Mr. Belgique, but there will be a new set of videos, interviews, discussions, and live streams available on the channel Zodiac Theory here on YouTube, and that will be coming soon. It's going to be mostly interview focused, but I think they will have a panel as well. One more time, Zodiac Theory here on YouTube. And also, there is a new episode on the channel New Coax, Nukehoax, on YouTube, well, under the name New Coax. That is, of course, hosted by Vincent McConnell. And I was a guest on that program over the weekend, and Vincent and I started off by talking about the murder of Cheri Jo Bates, but then we went into all things Zodiac. And originally, I thought it was going to be exclusively a Cheri Jo Bates discussion, but we decided to incorporate many things from the Zodiac Killer mystery. But I tried to get into the mindset of thinking about the Cheri Jo Bates case, so I decided to watch a program that I hadn't listened to before, and I found a podcast on YouTube called Campus Killings. And it's from Abjack Entertainment, so that looks like Mike Morford's company. Nothing wrong with that. I actually really like Mike Morford. And his company, Abjack Entertainment, puts out Campus Killings, and I decided to listen to their episode on the murder of Cheri Jo Bates from 1966. She was killed on October 30th that year after leaving the Riverside City College Library at some time. Some people believe that she was the first victim of the Zodiac Killer, and other people believe that her death is simply unrelated. But one of the biggest reasons why people believe that Cheri Jo was killed by the Zodiac is because of the letters and the communications that came following her murder. In November of 1966, we have the confession, and in December of 1966, we have the discovery of the desktop poem that says, "Sick of living, unwilling to die." And in the spring of 1967, we had the mailing of the Bates Had to Die letters. The 3 letters that said either Bates had to die, there will be more, or she had to die, there will be more, and they are signed with a Z. Now, Campus Killings took a very strong stance, and they stated that they believed that all of the communications were hoaxes. And again, this is a very introductory statement. It was hosted by 2 female podcasters, and they're giving their own original take on the subject. And I think it's a very bold one to start out with, that all of the letters and communications following the murder of Cheri Jo Bates were hoaxes, and they provided some of their rationale. Vincent and I went into great detail about the desktop poem, about how we thought that it was nothing more than an unrelated attempt at emotional expression by somebody who signed it with RH. And they, of course, adopted the conventional narrative on campus killings that the Bates Had to Die letters were created by somebody who confessed to hoaxing them. In 2016, some unidentified individual claimed that he fabricated the Bates Had to Die letters in 1967 and he did it as a prank, and the hosts of campus killings accepted that. Now, these are the things that aren't too controversial, even though there are many people out there to this day that insist that the desktop poem and the Bates Had to Die letters were authentic. There are even more people who believe that these are unrelated or hoaxes. However, the Riverside Confession is one that is highly, highly disputed, and I have said this very clearly. I believe this wholeheartedly, that out of all the letters mailed after Cheri Jo Bates' murder, the Riverside Confession has the highest chance of being authentic. The one that says, Miss Bates was stupid, she went to the slaughter like a lamb, beware I'm stalking your girls now. But on campus killings, they put forward the case that they simply thought that this was somebody learning about things from the newspapers. This was somebody learning about the details of the case from the media, and also people talking about the case, but they believed that there was absolutely nothing in the confession that would indicate that Cheri Jo was actually murdered by the person who wrote that. Furthermore, they also were stating that it says that Cheri Jo Bates went to the slaughter like a lamb, but she didn't. She actually fought back very hard, and everything was rough, and the person is saying more or less that he murdered Cheri Jo Bates effortlessly, but that's not exactly what happened. Now, one point of contention that always comes up, and campus killings even brought attention to this, when they said that they believed that, when people put forward this point, when they believe that Cheri Jo's car had a middle wire that was pulled out of the distributor, and that detail was not mentioned in the press, in the public sphere. Like, how on earth could the killer have known that? How on earth could the killer have known that the middle wire to the distributor had been pulled from her car if that hadn't been revealed yet? And their simple answer was, well, that's how you tamper with a car. That's how you disable a car. And in the 1960s, cars were a little bit simpler, for lack of a better term. And Ken Maines even talked about this on Unsolved No More when he did his Cheri Jo Bates episode. And he said that, yeah, auto mechanics were way simpler in the 1960s and 70s. And a lot of people would have had this type of awareness where if somebody wanted to disable someone's vehicle, all they had to do was pull the middle wire from the distributor. So they were saying that it seems like there's absolutely no evidence that the killer actually wrote the confession letter, and perhaps that person just knew a thing or two about cars and knew that that's what you had to do if you were going to commit the crime. And it also appears that the murderer of Cheri Jo Bates knew a thing or two about cars, but that doesn't really help us too much. We would be dealing with a late teens to early 40s male individual in Southern California who knew something about cars. That also doesn't narrow things down. But I would love to know what you guys think about that statement from Campus Killings, that there is absolutely nothing in the Riverside Confession that suggests that it was written by the Zodiac Killer or the killer of Cheri Jo Bates. I would love to know what you think. Please put your responses down below. And, feel free to dispute that because that is a widely discussed subject. Moving on to the next segment here on the Zodiac Killer News Report, there is a new video that is going to be discussing the Zodiac's Z13 cipher, and it is available on the channel Baseball Cap Safety. I have to give a shout out to Sean P., who posted this in a group called the Zodiac Killer Library, and he's talking about his proposed solution to the Zodiac Z13 cipher. And I know a lot of people aren't crazy about solutions to the Z13 cipher, but this one turned out to be pretty good. This one turned out to be one that I thought was rather fascinating, because it wasn't so much the method that he was using, it's the reason why he chose to use this. One more time, it's called I Cracked the Zodiac's Z13 Cipher, Hidden Answer Revealed on Baseball Cap Safety. And his ultimate solution relies on a statement and challenge from Dr. D.C.B. Marsh of the American Cryptogram Association, and he said that he wanted to put forward this challenge to the Zodiac Killer, that you can put your real name in the cipher, make it as complex as you want, make it as challenging as you want, and the ACA will be able to crack the cipher. Maybe even Dr. D.C.B. Marsh himself would have been able to crack the cipher. However, the Zodiac Killer did something, and they were unable to crack it. And could this actually be a type of empty threat and taunt? I said thaunt, threat and taunt put together. And I'm gonna be very direct. His solution relies on using the key to the Zodiac's 340 cipher. The Zodiac mailed 4 confirmed ciphers: the Z408, the Z340, the Z13, and the Z32. With the Z340 cipher, it was solved in 2020. So at the time that the Z13 cipher was mailed in 1970, the Z340 hadn't been solved yet. And yes, Sean is going to be someone who is proposing the idea that the same key, or remnants of the key, a portion of the key, is going to be used to solve the Z13 cipher. And longtime listeners of Black Box Online Radio know that I have been horribly critical of people who have proposed this in the past. I've never liked this idea in the past, because I just simply thought that if somebody had enough knowledge to create codes like the Z408 and the Z340, he probably would have done something different. Why use the same method more than once? I know that the 340 hadn't been solved yet, but let's say hypothetically he mails the Z13 and then they solve the Z340 a week later. Then they could have the solutions to both ciphers, and that would make him look really dumb, and Dr. D.C.B. Marsh would have just been laughing at him until his death. But with this video that was made by Sean P. on the channel Baseball Cap Safety, it was actually pretty good because he showed a different way of using this method. And again, it's all about the taunt, specifically tied to a quotation from Edgar Allan Poe, that any code that was created by man can be solved by man, some variant of that. And yes, many other people have paid attention to that quotation from Edgar Allan Poe, and Sean was very keen to give credit to Richard Grinnell of ZodiacCiphers.com, who even said that if there is a solution to the Z13 cipher, it most likely involves the writings of Edgar Allan Poe in a particular manner or fashion. And some of the but let's just look at the solution that he has proposed, and the answer is you take the code from the 340 cipher, and then you unscramble the text, and you're going to have to eliminate 3 symbols for spaces, and then you're going to have El Dorado EA. And this could relate to the poem El Dorado by Edgar Allan Poe. And this, again, is not arbitrary because it's done in response to Poe. It's also talking about, he also goes into some of the connections with dates and significance that could be related to Edgar Allan Poe. And I think that this ties in very neatly to something that we've been talking about on Zodiac Monday for some time, about how the Zodiac Killer is just stealing and borrowing other ideas from books and other famous writers and comic books and movies and all of those things. So in regards to this solution, I mean, El Dorado EA, I mean, it really represents, the city of El Dorado, because what's that all about? Looking for a city of gold that may or may not exist, looking for something that you most likely will not find, sending somebody on a wild goose chase, sending somebody on some type of far out and wacky treasure hunt, and all of these things could be symbolic to the Zodiac Killer. It's almost like my name is the Holy Grail, or something of that caliber. But I'm going to read the poem for you by Edgar Allan Poe, and let's see if this ties in. And Edgar Allan Poe was born in 1809, he died in 1849. El Dorado. Gaily bedight, a gallant knight, in sunshine and in shadow, had journeyed long, singing a song, in search of El Dorado. But he grew old, this knight so bold, and o'er his heart a shadow fell, as he found no spot of ground that looked like El Dorado. And also, I have to throw in this interjection. Think about that. Searching for something that you most likely will not find. Searching for the killer's identity, and you're not actually going to get it. And as his strength failed him at length, he met a pilgrim shadow. Shadow, said he, where can it be, this land of El Dorado? Over the mountains of the moon, down the valley of the shadow, Ride boldly ride, the shade replied, if you seek El Dorado. So this could be somebody making a taunt or making a comment about Edgar Allan Poe in the press, then the Zodiac responds. And to the credit of David Ornschak, he talked about how the Zodiac killer had been mentioned by Dr. DCB Marsh multiple times in the paper. This is on the channel Let's Crack the Zodiac. So it's almost as if the Zodiac was egging him on, or it's almost as if Dr. DCB Marsh is egging the Zodiac on to participate in some type of game. And then the Zodiac's thinking, hey, I know a thing or two about codes, so I can create something that you aren't going to be able to solve. How about a code that's 13 symbols long? And one of the reasons why I've been so critical of the Z340 solutions in the past is two other people that have used this method are Faisal Zarawi and Dr. Ryan Garlick. And I absolutely think that Sean P's solution is better than theirs because firstly, Faisal Zarawi used a type of metric to eliminate certain characters. You might be wondering, if everybody's using the same method, taking the 340 cipher and the symbols from the 340 cipher and using that code as the key, then wouldn't they all get the same solutions? And the answer is no, because they have personalized approaches. What Faisal Zarawi did was, he took the 340 key, applied it to the Z13, and he eliminated certain symbols, and he crossed them out, and he was left with the letters K-A-Y-R. And he thought that this was significant enough to share with the world, and he thought that that meant Lawrence Kane, K-A-Y-R, Kayir. Maybe Lawrence K, maybe Lawrence Kane, K-A-Y-N, can also spell Kane. But I was just like, that doesn't really seem to be very accurate. It looks like you intentionally fudged the cipher to get a desired result. With Dr. Ryan Garlick's solution, it was Dr. Ida Torpedo. Everything that Sean has said in the video was also shared by Dr. Ryan Garlick. It's a response to Dr. DCB Marsh, the challenge, the taunts, all of that stuff, egging the Zodiac on in the press, saying that he wants the Zodiac to make some cipher that he can't crack. So what he said was Dr. Ida Torpedo, which is more or less an insult to Dr. DCB Marsh, and it's a sexual metaphor, and a torpedo was also a type of explosive. But the problem with Dr. Ryan Garlick's solution was there were mistakes, and you had to ultimately self-correct two characters on your own and just kind of figure out where the mistakes were. Now, you might be wondering, Sean's solution is El Dorado EA. That's the final one. And somebody rightly called him out in the comments section saying, now, wait a second, what is this EA that is at the end? How on earth does that fit? And my honest answer is, I don't know. Even though I think that this attempt at solving the Z13 is pretty good. El Dorado EA. Is this a clue to the Zodiac Killer's identity? Does EA represent his initials? Or let's look at it in a different way. Does it mean Edgar Allan? Because we're talking about Edgar Allan Poe, and El Dorado is, yes, the fictional city of gold, or maybe it's real, I'll always give you that. It is the lost city of gold, for lack of a better term, to just keep everybody quiet in the comment section. But yes, it's a reference to the poem from Edgar Allan Poe. So EA could be Edgar Allan. But if that is the case, and if anybody were to propose that, including Sean, I would provide the simple challenge. Well, why wouldn't it just say EAP? Why not just make the Z14 cipher with the letter P included? That would actually fit nicely, and it would actually be a clear solution. If his final solution was El Dorado EAP, I would just be saying, yeah, I totally get it. But the fact that it only says EA Edgar Allan and you just have to expect that there was a P for Poe, I mean, I don't really think that that fits. That's the same problem as Faisal Zarawi, Kayir. Why not just say Kane? Same problem as Dr. Ryan Garlick. Dr. Ida taught pedo, and you have to correct it yourself. El Dorado, EA. It's not completely perfect. I understand how he did it. I understand the reasons why he did it. He provided some pretty good reasons in his video, and it's one of the better attempts at solving the Z13 that I've encountered, but at the same time, I'm not completely convinced that this one is right, but a very, very valiant effort. And I should point out that El Dorado is not only the fictional city of gold. Did it again. It's not only the lost city of gold. Keep everybody quiet. I know there's some believers out there. But El Dorado is also a county in California. It is a county in Texas that was subject of a Western movie that came out with John Wayne and Robert Mitchum, and that also features the George Alexander song El Dorado, which is partially based on this poem, which I'll read later at the end. And, El Dorado is also a county in Arkansas, although, as I've heard on other YouTube channels, there it's pronounced El Dorado. So, could this be a place name on a U.S. map, as opposed to the lost city of gold? I don't know. What do you think? Let me know in the comments section down below. Now, I have something that I want to ask you guys, and I want to be very, very serious about this. Switching gears to a different subject now, on the Zodiac Killer News Report. Last week, I asked you guys a challenge question that I didn't get a response to, and I really want to hear this. Because it comes to us from Michael Cole, the previously mentioned author of the Zodiac Revisited trilogy, and it's talking all about the Stein murder, the murder of Paul Stein on October 11th of 1969, the Zodiac Killer's final confirmed crime. And in this particular scenario, the Zodiac told Paul Stein to drive him to Washington and Maple Street in Presidio Heights in San Francisco. Then the Zodiac ultimately did something that caused the plan to change. He deviated from the plan, and the taxi that was driven by Paul Stein ended up on Washington and Cherry, and the Zodiac shot Paul Stein once with a single gunshot to the side of the head. Yet, when he wrote his letter, he said, "This is the Zodiac speaking. I am the murderer of the taxi driver over by Washington and Maple Street." And Michael Cole's interpretation of this evidence was something that, okay, now, this seems like somebody who was not familiar with the area, someone who did not live in Presidio Heights, and he was also somebody who probably planned this out by looking at maps or just getting a brief introduction to the street names. And if he lived in Presidio Heights, and these were the streets that he walked every day, why not just say, "I am the murderer of the taxi driver on Washington and Cherry," if it was his neighborhood? And there are multiple Zodiac killer suspects who lived in Presidio Heights, most notably Shel Cavalli, the subject of the books In the Shadow of Mount Diablo and Flirting with the Executioner. So why wouldn't he just say Washington and Cherry? My challenge question to you was, do you think that Michael Cole is right, or do you think that he is wrong? And I really want to hear your responses for this one. That's why I'm sharing it again, and I'm also going to be putting up the Stein letter on the screen. And one of the reasons why I'm bringing this up is I had the opportunity to ask this question to Vincent McConnell on New Cokes. Well, what do you think about this? And he brought up a statement that he had heard from Tom Voigt, and that is that, well, what if the Zodiac Killer had planned out his letter before he committed the murder? What if he had either written the first line or thought about how he was going to write the first line? Or maybe he even had it written down in some other way, like scratch paper. That one I'm adding in as a possibility. And he transferred it. Maybe he was thinking about the original plan and not the modification. So what do you think about this? Because I really, really want to know some more responses and feedback from people. And the previously mentioned New Cokes channel is run by Vincent McConnell, and he is still short of subscribers to go live. Yes, he launched his channel, I think last year, 2024, but he had to relaunch the channel. So if you haven't subscribed to New Cokes yet, please feel free to do so. And that is a channel that is going to have lots and lots of Zodiac Killer coverage and content. And right now I would like to get to your supporter shoutouts. You can support this channel at buymeacoffee.com. buymeacoffee.com/blackboxonlineradio, and that allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show. And anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. And our first shout out comes to us from Batman66. Batman66, thank you so much for your regular and consistent support. Batman bought you a coffee. I never get tired of saying that. And Batman66 has a message on buymeacoffee.com. Monday is symbolized by the moon, stemming from its Old English name, Monandig, Moon's Day. Well, Zodiac Moon Day, maybe we'll do something like that for Halloween. And by the way, there's actually going to be a Halloween party here on Black Box Online Radio. I normally do something like that, but last year's special was just talking about the Zodiac Killer Halloween card and the story of San Francisco's Jack the Ripper. It was mostly done as a true crime special, but oh goodness, it's been perhaps has it been 7 years? I've been doing a Halloween celebration here on Black Box Online Radio. But if you're curious about the Halloween festivities and you want something to do on Halloween night, feel free to check out the Halloween special on Black Box Online Radio. This episode is coming out in September, and I'm probably going to release the Halloween special in mid-October in case people want to check it out early, and you can always do a replay on October 31st if you want to just hang out for a little while. But to move on, we also have another shout-out coming to us from River Prawn Pottery. River Prawn Pottery is another regular and consistent supporter. And River Prawn Pottery had a very good question, and that was asking me about the Kathleen Johns interview that was done with Howard Davis. Because when I was talking to Michael Cole, author of the Zodiac Revisited trilogy, he asked me if I was familiar with the interview that Kathleen Johns had done with Howard Davis, who was author of the Zodiac Manson Connection, and I said yes, and he was saying, well, where can we get a copy of this? And as I understand, Tom Voigt does have a copy of it, but it is not going to be revealed to the general public in its entirety as of now. When I said that I was familiar with it, Howard Davis appeared on the Zodiac Killer channel in 2021, and I interviewed him, and he told several stories from his interview with Kathleen Johns. This is what happened. She even brought her daughter with her, who was the baby in the car at the time when Kathleen Johns was allegedly abducted by the Zodiac Killer. And, he shared his experiences interviewing her on the Zodiac Killer channel. But that interview, of course, is no longer available online, as all of the Zodiac Killer channel interviews for some reason, and ultimately that is something that appears to have been lost to time. But maybe those resources will come back to the general public in the future. And the next one that we have is from CZ Guy. CZ Guy is another regular and consistent supporter. And CZ Guy, thank you so much. I appreciate that. It wouldn't be complete without you three guys. Batman 66, River, Prawn, Pottery, and CZ Guy. I really thank you for everything that you've done for Black Box Online Radio. And our next one comes to us from Flora, who says, Ned, I owe you an apology for going off and for being disrespectful to your channel. I'm truly sorry. Hey, Flora, if you said something in the comment section that you feel bad about, you don't have to apologize on buymeacoffee.com. Of course, that's appreciated, and I do thank you for your sincerity. But as most of you know, the comment section here is fairly open, and I do welcome different types of ideas. The most things that are not welcome are things like bullying, harassment, as well as insulting people's family members, insulting the victims in cases, and of course, spamming and posting incoherent statements. But other than that, if people are discussing the Zodiac case, then they are welcome to post. And our next supporter on buymeacoffee.com comes to us from Lehman, who says, thought you might need a coffee after Larry Harnish dismissed you. Okay, on Thursdays here on Black Box Online Radio, I do a segment about the Black Dahlia. It's a very new segment, and out of all the stories that I talk about on Black Box Online Radio, it's the one that I'm least familiar with. Even though I haven't made a Madeleine McCann episode in years, maybe even like 6 years or something like that, I'm not even sure. I did in the past. I talked a lot about Madeleine McCann in 2018 and 2019, and the disappearance of Madeleine McCann is perhaps one of the most famous missing persons cases in the world, if not the most famous. So I'm somewhat familiar with the story. With the Black Dahlia, it was just back to the drawing board. Yes, I've heard of George Hodel because he's a Zodiac Killer suspect. And the suspect of Steve Hodel. Yes, I've heard of Edward Wayne Edwards. He is a Zodiac Killer suspect. And he's also a Black Dahlia suspect, and countless other individuals who have been accused of being the Zodiac Killer and the Black Dahlia Avenger from 1947. So I fully admit that it's a learning experience with me, but I'm not even an expert on the Zodiac case. The reason why I started these segments is I wanted to share my journey with you. I wanted to share my thought process with you about how I encounter new information related to these true crime cases. And one of the people who is an expert on the Zodiac Killer, sorry, not Zodiac Killer case, Black Dahlia case, one of the people who is an expert on the Black Dahlia is named Larry Harnish. And he does a monthly Ask Me Anything on his channel, Larry Harnish. And I got banned from it because he said that I count as a true crime podcaster and I'm part of the media, and he does not do interviews. And my participation in his Ask Me Anything episodes would count as an interview. Now, I've never tried to interview him. I've never even tried to contact him. I was just watching his show and asking questions in the live chat, and he said that he would not talk to me. So that's what Lehman is referring to. And, Larry Harnish does have the right to do that. But at the same time, somebody like me who does Dahlia Thursday here on Black Box Online Radio is a little bit disappointed because I think that it would have been a good experience for me to interact with somebody like that who has followed the Black Dahlia case for 30 years. Lehman continues by saying, on the positive, he didn't say anything bad about you, and it seems obvious that he watched your videos, so that's an endorsement by proxy in my book. Yeah, there is something to that. I mean, it seems like he's familiar with Dahlia Thursday, so if he's followed the case for 30 years and he still wants to listen to Black Box Online Radio, bring it on. More power to him. I do not like how Harnish dismisses things by saying it isn't in the files and then doesn't explain it further. All right. See, one of the reasons why I really wanted to participate in his AMA discussions is I've done countless Q&A sessions here on Black Box Online Radio. I've gone live many times. I used to do the True Crime Talk Radio in the morning segment every Tuesday and Thursday, and lots of people would ask questions about the Zodiac Killer. But then, in case somebody hadn't heard the previous episode, they would ask me a question that I've already talked about, and I've already answered 6 or 7 times. So I totally get it about how maybe he doesn't like talking about the same question over and over again or giving the same response over and over again. That much I could comprehend. So what I was really trying to do was, as a participant in his live streams, was to ask my questions in a creative and engaging way, and I had so many things that I wanted to talk about, just so he would actually give direct answers and not just say, oh, well, this is the answer, and then move on to something else because it's boring for him. But, again, I am banned from the live chat, so that will not be happening. But I encourage anybody else who's curious about the Black Dahlia case to weigh in the comments section down below. But Lehman actually says, I'm guessing he will reveal the details in his book. And even though I got banned from the live chats, I still cannot wait to read his book. I think it's going to be absolutely excellent about the Black Dahlia murder from 1947. And we have another supporter on buymeacoffee.com, and this one comes to us from CG Karras. And CG Karras says, 2 double shots equals 4 suspects. Well, I'll take the 2 double shots of espresso. And C.G. Karras is the author of the book Zodiac Murderers, Ciphers, and Crimes. Wait, Zodiac Killer, Murderers in History, Ciphers, and Crimes. There, see, the 4 shots, 4 names too, right, C.G. Karras? And that is a book that discusses 4 different Zodiac Killer suspects. And it's more or less that there were CIA rogue agents that were responsible for these murders. And C.G. Karras has found some connections among the people that he discusses. And the 4-person team would be Hugh Penn, Xenophon Anthony, Lawrence Kane, and somebody named George Caradanas. And this year on Black Box Online Radio, I did my first episode called Zodiac Killer Suspect George Caradanas. As I understand, he went by the name Geo Caradanas, and you can hear that episode here on Black Box Online Radio, and you can also check out the book by C.G. Karras, the Zodiac Killer, Murderers and Histories, Ciphers, and Crimes. I'm going to get it down perfectly one day, C.G. Karras, but you can also check out his book on Amazon.com. And thank you so much to everyone who has left comments and ideas in the section down below, as well as sending things into blackboxonlineradio at AOL.com. And I would like to give a big shout out to Dennis G, who helps find a lot of the images that you see going by on the screen, Flora as well. And Dennis G has also been finding things for the other programs about the Black Dahlia, Jack the Ripper, Madeline McCann, and D.B. Cooper on Fridays. Now, to move on to the next segment here on Black Box Online Radio, there is a true crime channel that is out there that is called True Records of Crime, and they made a video called Zodiac Killer Case, New Proof, new suspect, and they claimed that they were going to reveal something about the Zodiac Killer mystery. This video came out about 2 weeks ago, and I'm always a little bit skeptical when I'm approaching these things, but I thought, you know what, I'm going to give it a try. And I'm just going to play a segment from their video. I'm going to play a little segment, and then we will respond.
Rock Springs Park, Vallejo. Independence Day celebrations had just ended. Michael Majot, 19 years old, works at Arthur Lee Allen's Sporting Goods. He was free that night. Darlene Farron, 22 years old, waitress at Terry's restaurant, married but living separately, has a 4-year-old son. Darlene was using her own car, brown Corvair. Michael was sitting beside her, 0010. They came to the parking area. Other couples were there too, but far away. At 0015, a white Chevrolet Corvair approached, stopped next to them. The attacker got out of the car, tall, between 5 feet 9 inches to 5 feet 11 inches, had a flashlight. He pointed the flashlight at Michael's face, then at Darlene. Said nothing. Michael, what does this guy want? Darlene was silent, as if she recognized this man. The attacker returned to his car.
And one more time, that was from the video, Zodiac Killer Case, New Proof, New Suspect from True Records of Crime. Alright, so, are there any problems with that video? Well, it seems that this is one that does not have a lot of fact-checking, proofreading, and it might have been an AI-generated script. One thing that I really try to reinforce on Black Box Online Radio, and especially on Zodiac Monday, is that I have no problem with people using AI scripts if they are accurate, and especially if there's a human overseeing the channel. But saying that Mike Mago was working for the Arthur Lee Allen Sporting Good Company, and then Darlene Farron had to leave her son at home. Arthur Lee Allen Sporting Good Company? I was not aware of this, that Mike Majot worked for the Arthur Lee Allen Sporting Good Company. I also was not aware that Darlene Farron had a son. I mean, Arthur Lee Allen, of course, is the name of a suspect, as opposed to the Sporting Good Company. And I just think that AI got a little bit confused there and started stitching things together. That video actually started out decently. Okay, maybe not decently. It started out in a not horrible way, but then once they hit the Blue Rock Springs shooting, it just got crazier and crazier. And we have to pay attention to AI slop, my friends. And the next thing that I would like to talk about here on the Zodiac Killer News Report is one of the books that I've been going through. And this is one that is from Jason Hughes. This would be Zodiac Letters, Edward Wayne Edwards, Volume 2. Now, some of you might remember earlier this year, I did a book discussion on Zodiac Letters, Edward Wayne Edwards, Volume 1. That one has the red cover, this one has the blue cover, Volume 2. And it's written by a Jason Hughes, and he's discussing a very widely named Zodiac killer suspect, Edward Edwards. But the overall thesis statement to these books is not that Ed Edwards was the most prolific serial killer of all time. Instead, it is that maybe he was the most prolific serial killer letter writer of all time, specifically focusing on how Edward Wayne Edwards could have written the letters and the communications that are surrounded in multiple true crime cases, because as we're going to see, cryptic serial killers are much more common than we think, and they're also depicted a lot in the media. So please stick around to the end of this episode, because I'm going to be discussing a movie called The Sniper from 1952, which is going to have a lot of possible Zodiac killer influences. But in terms of how this book functions, it is an extremely fast-moving book, and I think that you can get pulled into reading it very quickly. And as far as the substance material is concerned, Jason Hughes made a very interesting point about stating that Edward Wayne Edwards was around 5 feet 9 inches tall. And when somebody is 5 feet 8 or 5 feet 9 inches tall, they enter into a realm of ambiguity. They are not short and they are not tall. And I will just tell you from personal experience that this is true. I'm 5 feet 8 inches tall, and it really does push you into that world. Sometimes people will think that you're short. Sometimes people will think that you're taller than other people. So this type of ambiguity is definitely present. And this is one thing that I think truly helped the Zodiac killer get away, and that's bad. But it's that people are just not able to identify him properly. He's very in the middle when it comes to a lot of things. Maybe 5'8", maybe 5'9", maybe 5'10". But when you look at the witness descriptions, they're all over the map. Well, he could have been 6 feet tall. He could have been 6 foot or better. No, he's 5 feet 8 inches tall and on the shorter side. If somebody is 5 feet 8 inches tall or 5'9", then they're in this ambiguity area. But that's not the heart and soul of this book. I think that this book truly came alive on page 134 when he provided the personality description of Edward Wayne Edwards. And I mean, this is just something that really relates to a Zodiac killer suspect and gets to the heart of the issue about why he thinks that he may have been a serial killer. Because with Edward Wayne Edwards, he's in a different category. Even though Jason Hughes is going to make the statement that he's not the most prolific serial killer of all time, like John Cameron accused him of 660 murders, Edward Wayne Edwards was a real serial killer, and he's also a Zodiac killer suspect. Edward Wayne Edwards was a psychopath. He was able to kill without feeling any strong feelings of remorse. Okay, that's very important because Ed Edwards was a real serial killer, and he also wrote his own book called The Metamorphosis of a Criminal, which, I mean, my personal take on that is that he was just hiding in plain sight with his destructive tendencies. Number 2, he admitted to having a bad temper. I believe when he lost his temper, he would kill, and he would also kill for financial gain, to silence someone who knew his identity, to settle any score in an anonymous way. All right. So this sounds like a serial killer that has a very specific MO, and that is practicality. Now, does that sound like the Zodiac killer? One thing that I've noticed about the Zodiac killer is that he seems to be committing the crimes purely because he wants to commit murder and get away with it, and get his name in the papers. Now, everything that you just heard in that statement from Edward Wayne Edwards is a little bit to the contrary, where Ed Edwards is somebody who's described as committing this so it can further a different criminal enterprise. What do you think, though? And the next one is, I would compare the psychology of that of an arsonist. I almost said anarchist. Maybe, but I'm going to read that again. I would compare his psychology to that of an arsonist. He liked to start a fire, commit a murder, and then observe the consequences. All right, now this is very important to psychopathy in relation to the Zodiac killer, Edward Wayne Edwards, if he is your suspect, Edward Wayne Edwards, if he is not your suspect. And this is just how psychopaths function. There is an entire section in the book, The Sociopath Next Door by Dr. Martha Stout, where she tells the story of people who are just like this, where they commit a crime and then they want to sit back and they want to see the police cars coming and arriving because they want to put the events in motion just to see what happens. They might even torture animals just to see what happens. Again, this is a very, very accurate statement about psychopaths. And the next one, many of his crimes were deliberately calculated to cause media storms. All right, now we have a strong point in line with Edward Wayne Edwards being the Zodiac. Absolutely, the Zodiac did that. 110% to the nth power times infinity, the Zodiac killer did that. Let me read that again. Many of his crimes were deliberately calculated to cause media storms. That's what the Zodiac was doing. And if he's going to make the case for Edward Wayne Edwards, and he'll go into great detail throughout the book, tying him into multiple crimes. And then we have, he would pose as a trusted person, a family man, a preacher, a policeman, or an ex-Marine. I think the Zodiac would have done things like that because he definitely had a personal life to the best of our knowledge. And number 7, he wanted to tie all of his murders together with signatures and symbolism. Well, the Zodiac killer did that once again. 110% to the nth degree times infinity. The Zodiac tied his crimes together with symbolism and imagery, and the exact words here, though, signatures and symbolism. Yes, of course. And I'll just read one more. He used multiple techniques to frame his victims, planting bodies, DNA, and signing affidavits, sending anonymous tips to the press and journalists. Also like the Zodiac, he confessed to being the Zodiac after a 9-month letter-writing correspondence with John Cameron. Well, now here's another point, though. The first half of that set of statements that I just read off is something that I would absolutely take to the bank and say that that's a strong point in terms of similarities between Edward Wayne Edwards and the Zodiac, that he is giving these types of false clues, planting bodies, DNA, signing affidavits. Now, of course, I don't think the Zodiac killer planted any DNA, because he wouldn't have known about DNA back in 1968 and 69 and 1970. Leaving false clues, absolutely. Writing false clues and taunts in his letters, Absolutely, I think the Zodiac would have done something like that. But one point that I don't put any stock in is this concept of the Zodiac killer or Edward Wayne Edwards telling the truth to people who are trying to interrogate him. And if Edward Wayne Edwards made some confession to John Cameron, I don't care what he said, because people do not always tell the truth. And furthermore, why hasn't the validity of this confession been accepted by everyone if it's so good? Why hasn't law enforcement taken it seriously? And does this not also suggest that a sociopath isn't just playing games with John Cameron? Does this not also suggest that the sociopath doesn't have evidence to support and back up his claims? That's what it seems like is happening here. So I don't really care if Edward Wayne Edwards said that he was the King of England or something like that. He was a liar. Sociopaths lie. Psychopaths lie. And everybody knows this, so why would you accept the confession, but then say that they're lying about other things? But anyway, it's a fascinating book and a fascinating read. Zodiac Letters, Edward Wayne Edwards, Volume 2 by Jason Hughes. And it really goes into great detail on lots of different true crime cases that could have been committed by the Zodiac Killer. In terms of Zodiac Killer books out there, there's another one that I was talking to you about recently called Zodiac Lives by Rhoda Dottore. And it is one that is a novel, and it's an older novel out there. And I think it's one that would be a little bit more appealing to people who are only mildly familiar with the Zodiac Killer mystery. It tells the story of 3-year-old Jennifer, who is just haunted by some type of weird set of nightmares, and she starts calling for her mom in the middle of the night, and her mother says, "I'm here." And then Jennifer says, "But you weren't with me in the Presidio." And her mother's like, "What? You weren't with me in the Presidio." And she keeps talking and talking about this word Presidio and saying the Presidio. And her mother's like, "What on earth is going on?" Then her daughter passes out. Her face turns white and her lips turn blue, and they have to take her to the hospital, to the emergency room. What is she saying about the Presidio? What on earth is going on? Well, it turns out that she might actually be the reincarnated spirit of one of the Zodiac Killer's victims, and she is recalling the events of the murder. Almost a type of spiritual possession, but that's not even the real term. This is a reincarnation story, but yes, carrying on with the spirit, so maybe reincarnation will fit in somewhat accurately to that. But the reason why I said that I think that it's somewhat relevant to the Zodiac Killer stories, and to people who are going to be loosely familiar with the case might appreciate it. Well, who is this going to be? They're trying to build up some type of suspense. Well, who was the Zodiac Killer victim who was murdered in the Presidio? No one. No one, unless there's going to be some surprise, and, it's going to be an absolutely unrelated event like the Black Sapphire murder, but perhaps she's referring to the murder of Paul Stein in Presidio Heights. And then the Black Sapphire murder was in 1965, the murder of Diane Louise Jerish, who reportedly wore a black sapphire ring that was stolen. Maybe if it's going to connect to something like that, it could be some type of surprise. Otherwise, she's just saying this word Presidio. Sometimes she calls it the Presidio, and they've determined that she's talking about stories from being a Zodiac Killer victim. I don't know, but I am a little bit curious to see what happens. One more time, Zodiac Lives by Rhoda Dottore. And to conclude this episode, I would like to discuss the film The Sniper from 1952, and giving a shout-out to Batman66, who informed me about this one. This is one that I actually had to watch on Daily Motion, and it's been a long time since I've watched a show on Daily Motion, but sometimes they have a lot of older TV and movie content. The Sniper is not exactly a Zodiac-style film. Could it have been an inspiration? Perhaps. The Sniper is a serial killer who kills people from a distance, of course, as a sniper. It tells the story of a man named Eddie who is an excellent marksman, not only with a gun, but he's also extremely accurate with other things, even throwing a baseball, as you'll see in the movie. He is a mentally troubled man, someone who is deranged and confused. And I think this movie wanted to show his descent into madness, as well as making it appear that he was someone who had a very, very confusing and chaotic mindset. Now, the story of the Sniper could be somewhat Zodiac relevant because he is a cryptic serial killer. He mails a letter to the police stating facts that only he and the police should know, particularly the type of ammunition that was used. A big difference between the sniper and the Zodiac killer is the sniper is somebody who is using the same type of gun and the same type of ammo in every crime. So what he does is he takes the box of ammunition, tears off a piece of the cardboard, and writes his cryptic note and saying, I am the sniper, I'm going to do this, please stop me so I don't do it again. And again, it's this very, very confusing element where he wants to surrender, but at the same time, he doesn't want to stop killing unless he is caught. So there are a bunch of very confusing sets of events. He talks about a horrible relationship with his mother. No matter what he does, he's just like having problems with people. He's just trying to interact with society and humanity, but he's just very awkward. So there are all of these chaotic things that are happening. But of course, I won't give away anything that is a spoiler. However, the sniper is somebody who does mail in that letter to prove that he is from the killer by using the ammo box that shouldn't have been revealed to the public. He is stating that he is indeed the killer, and he's helping the police catch him in some ways. Now, I don't necessarily know if the Zodiac was trying to do something like that, but a very, very entertaining movie. And in terms of films that I've been talking about recently on Zodiac Monday, we of course also have Shockproof from 1949. I apologize for appearing on New Cokes and calling it Shock Press. I don't know why that stood out in my mind. This was Shockproof from 1949. That film started out slow but got better. With the sniper, this film was continuously engaging. Very, very well done, and you really were just wanting to know what happened. Yes, they overdid the dramatic music, but a very suspenseful film. And I told you guys that I was going to truly end the episode with a reading of the lyrics from George Alexander from the song El Dorado, made famous in the Western movie featuring John Wayne. Because, as you will hear very clearly, this was something that appears like it was taken from Edgar Allan Poe and then turned into a song. In sunshine and shadow from darkness till noon, over mountains that reach from the sky to the moon, a man with a dream that will never let go, keeps searching to find El Dorado. So ride, boldly ride, to the end of the rainbow. Ride, boldly ride, till you find El Dorado. The wind becomes bitter, the sky turns to gray. His body grows weary, he can't find his way, but he'll never turn back, so he's lost in the snow. For he has to find El Dorado. My daddy once told me what ought a man to be. There's so much more to life than the things we can see, and the godliest mortal you will ever know is the one with the dream of El Dorado. All right, so, as you can see, Edgar Allan Poe has left a very big influence. Thank you so much for listening to this week's Zodiac Monday. I really, really want to know your response to that challenge question about the Stein letter and Michael Cole. I also really want to know what you think about the El Dorado solution to the Z13 cipher. And of course, what do you think about all of the letters in the Cheri Jo Bates case being hoaxes? And what do you think about Edward Wayne Edwards as a Zodiac killer suspect? Drop anything you want in the comment section down below. You know where to write the show, blackboxonlineradio@AOL.com, Black Box Online Radio on Facebook, blackboxned88 on TikTok and Instagram. And actually, the TikTok page is no longer up, excuse me. But the Instagram page is, of course, working strong. That's all for me now. Everybody have a wonderful week, and goodbye.